I titled the seminar Leadership because I wasn't sure how else to put it. I think it has as much to do with just group behavior as it does with leadership, although both are important. But the important thing I found, regardless of all the things that I pulled out of a course that I've found, that even any of those things that I learned, the most important requirement to be a leader is very simple, and that requirement is to know when to open your mouth and to know when to close your mouth. That's the requisite. The rest is details, as Hillel would say. The rest of it is pretty much going to sum up that one statement. You have to know when to speak, and you have to know when to remain silent. And in most situations, it calls for silence on a lot of issues. The reason for this is the tongue's ability to influence people. James says, it causes wildfires, absolutely huge wildfires. And this little bitty tongue is like a little match. And you strike that little match, and you think, well, a little match will go out in just a second. It won't last very long. But if you have touched that match to something dry, then you have just created Smokey the Bear's worst nightmare. You've created a huge forest fire, and we can spend years. You know this is true. Don't look at me like it's not. You know it's true that we can spend years throwing buckets of water on a wildfire that started with one match. We think the fire's out. We think the problem's over. We think it's solved, resolved, everybody's happy, but it's not. It's just smoldering, and it's waiting for one more careless word to fall out of one more mouth, and that whole thing will erupt right over again. And you're in trouble if you sent the fireman home, because you've got another wildfire on your hand. The flare-ups, if we're still flaring up over things that happened years ago, we've still got a problem with our tongues, because we're still letting careless matches fall out of our mouths. But sheep are easily influenced. That's why it's so easy for that wildfire to spread. If people just shut their mouths when they heard the gossip, it couldn't spread, right? It's just like putting your boot on it and the fire is out, and throw the dirt over it and it's dead, gone, buried, no problem. But if sheep are easily influenced, I guess you can say people are too. And, how many of us have been carried away by some wind of doctrine that troubled us in our minds and caused us confusion, and now you know the truth. And you look back and you think, how did I get carried away by that? Why did that trouble me? Why did that confuse me? It's so clear now. We are easily influenced, and it only takes one voice, one little match of a tongue setting fire to us when we're in a prime dry condition. So you need to guard yourself. Don't let yourself get dry, because you're much more easily lighted if you're dry. And this is true whether you're the President of the United States or whether you're the lowest person on the totem pole. If you're not willing to sign your name to a statement, you don't need to say it. What if every Shabbat, we've got portions in our service for different things. We've got liturgy, we've got the Torah message, we've got the Torah processional, we've got the announcements. What if we had a section in our Shabbat service where one person stood up at the podium and began to read all the things that had passed amongst us through the week, and we read it in the name of the person that originated the story? Would that be a little embarrassing? Would for me. Because sometimes I say things, and in reflecting I think maybe I wouldn't want to sign my name to that. Now sometimes we have to talk about things in confidence. If somebody comes to you in confidence and the problem directly concerns them, then it's your job to keep it to yourself. If the elders have to discuss a problem and use names, it's our responsibility to keep it to ourselves. If the deacons have a meeting and they have to discuss names, it is their responsibility to keep those names to themselves and not give hints as to who it was about. Stomp it out. Keep it to yourself. If you're not willing to post it on the wall at our congregation and sign your name to the statement, you don't need to say it. Just take responsibility for it. And that's the first step toward leadership. Know when to say it and know when not to say it. Now, there are a couple of different types of leadership that I'd like to look at because we have both. Every organization will usually have both. The first kind is positional leadership. And this is a type of office that commands a certain type of respect because of the position. It's not necessarily the person that commands the respect. And how many of you can recall a person that you have worked for either now or in the past that you really didn't have a whole lot of personal respect for? Maybe the person was not skilled at the job. They just weren't a good supervisor. Maybe they didn't know the job itself. Maybe you knew 10 times more about the job than they did, and they were supposed to be the supervisor. Maybe you knew that they were having an affair and hiding it from their wife. There was something wrong with their morals, their ethics. They were falling short in some way that even though they were your superior in the office, you did not feel as though they were morally superior to you or superior to you in the skill that the job demanded. Maybe their judgment was poor, but they could not command your respect based on their integrity. Instead, they had to rely on a positional leadership, the fact that they were simply higher than you on the food chain. That positional authority is what we respect. We respect the office, if not the person. Now, I don't care how you vote in the election. If the President of the United States were to walk through this door right here, we would all stand out of respect, right? We've never met the man. We may not share his politics. We don't, we're not on a first name basis with him. It's not, hey, George. But nevertheless, his office commands a respect. And no matter how you feel about his politics, you stand to your feet and you say, yes, sir. Because that's positional authority. We demand this from people who are in spiritual authority over us, even more than we do from the people that we work for. Because being a nonprofit organization, we have the freedom to walk away from a spiritual leader that we feel does not command our personal respect. We say, well, you might have the office or you might have the title, but you're no good at what you do, and I'm leaving and I'm going over here where there's a person I feel like I can respect. Nevertheless, you're always going to encounter people in a position of authority that you feel like fall short of your expectations and that fall short of your goals. But nevertheless, you must learn how to respect that position if you necessarily don't respect the person, because we even ask children to respect their elders, right? What if their parent's an alcoholic? What if the parent's a drug addict? What if the parent does have bad judgment? We still ask that they respect and honor their parents, right? So we must still respect and honor those who have positional authority over us, regardless of what's going on in their lives. Now, just the way that Scripture does not command us only to honor good parents, it simply says honor your parents. If you can transfer that into other areas of your life, especially on the job, then you will find that you are succeeding more in your relationships at work. But disagreement, see, we can disagree with a parent that has a problem, right? If we have a parent that's a drug addict and we perceive that that's a problem, we don't call our parents names. We don't do bad things to our parents and disrespect them. We respectfully disagree with their habit, right? You can disagree with what they're doing and yet be respectful. Even our Father in heaven allows us to respectfully disagree, right? Look at Abraham. He starts arguing over Sodom and Gomorrah, right? He says, well, what about if there's this many? And what about if there's this many? And at no time is he disrespectful in the argument. He continues to petition and try to persuade, and we can do the same. If someone is in a position of authority over us and we disagree with their decision, then we do have the privilege of respectfully disagreeing. Nevertheless, they have the final say-so, and we have to be able to back off like Abraham did and say, okay, let your will be done. That's where I've heard people say, because I'm the mommy, that's why. You finally get to a point where you can't explain anymore, and you get pushed into a corner, and where you said, well, I'll never say that to my kids, you find yourself saying, because I'm the mommy, that's why. I just have to have the positional authority to make this decision, and you can't understand it yet. You don't know what I know. You don't have the maturity to understand what I'm telling you. And so positional authority does give you the last word. It doesn't matter. Like I say, if the person is not necessarily skilled, if it's on the job, then you want to draw a paycheck, so you put up with a whole lot of unskilled supervisors. You put up with that positional authority. Same way in a congregation. No matter what congregation you go to, you are liable to encounter leaders who you feel are maybe weak, who are double-minded. They're going to exhibit human faults because guess what? They are human, after all. They weren't recruited from the ranks of angels. So you will encounter people who fall short in your expectations. However, the person still has positional authority in the congregation. We do expect our leaders, especially spiritual leaders, to have higher standards, to somehow exceed us in some way, because otherwise what mark do we have to shoot for? What can we aim for? And that's why it's so difficult to respect a supervisor that you feel falls short in so many areas on the job. And just because the paycheck's coming, you keep going to work. But in a congregation, in a church, in a synagogue, we have the freedom to walk out the door and not come back if we can't respect that positional authority. The lack of ability does not necessarily exempt the sheep from accountability to that authority. It simply means that they will fall short, and there is hopefully a local process in place that can deal with severe moral failures. But realize it's only severe moral failures that exempt you from following a bad leader. That's it. You can go to Scripture and you can find those reasons why a leader should be removed. But just because you do not necessarily like that person, or they're not fitting your personal expectations, does not mean that you do not owe them the positional authority. If you'll notice, there's an example of this in Scripture. Remember how many years that David ran from Shaul? The anointing had pretty much left Shaul, wouldn't you agree? And that anointing had been poured onto David. Nevertheless, he said, I'm not going to touch God's anointed, even though I recognize that his influential authority is gone. He's really lost the respect of the people, and I have the popular support of the people. I have a different type of authority than Shaul does. Nevertheless, I respect his position, and I will not harm him, even when it is within my power to do so, or even within my power to usurp that authority. Not only did he not try to wrestle the kingship from Shaul, he kept running away so as not to challenge it directly. So even the moral high ground, which is what David had, does not give us permission to try to challenge a leader's position, unless we are part of some sort of system of oversight that exists within that organization. But so many times it seems like the sheep are setting impossibly high standards for their leadership, and they're not going to be able to reach everyone's expectations. They simply cannot do it. But when they don't reach their personal expectations, they say, well, they don't deserve my respect. They haven't earned it. And we hear that a lot. Well, you don't get my respect because you haven't earned it. Positional authority demands your respect, whether you personally respect them or not. You respect the position. That's a mistake if you're not giving them the positional respect. Now, let me give you a good example. We know who controls the checkbook around here, right? Now, let's just say that I wanted to purchase some bar mitzvah books, and Brother Farley wouldn't approve it. He said, no, we don't have the money for such a thing right now. We've got some other bills. He thinks the cost is excessive. Now, I can do one of two things. I can say, okay, I respect your authority. We gave you the checkbook. We wanted you to run it. We knew you would do a good job. I'll reapproach when the time is right, or I might modify my request. On the other hand, I can disrespect his positional authority. I can begin to sabotage him. I can start gossiping about him to the deacon board. I can start planting little things in people's minds in conversations about Brother Farley. And you know what? I'm a signatory on the checkbook. I can go get a check. I can write the check anyway and just go right over his head. But what would that be? Disrespect to positional authority. We have to be able to abide positional authority, whether it fits with our expectations or whether it doesn't. And where I might be running around saying, he's doing this wrong, he's not supporting our program, it might be that I'm refusing to see this huge log that's sticking out of my eye, because I'm failing to respect his authority. I'm pushing something because I'm personally committed to it, not because it's the best thing for the congregation. He's doing a job that I'm not willing to do. Therefore, why should I push him around when one thing happens that doesn't fit what I want? And that's what we tend to do. We don't want to do the job, but when somebody else is doing the job, we want to nitpick when it rubs up against something that matters to us. You got to stay with them through the good times and through the bad times. You have to support them. You don't want to disrespect people who are doing a job you aren't willing to do. Now, we've got a lot of people in this congregation with positional authority. Some of them have a formal title, such as elder or deacon, and some do not. Nevertheless, they have that positional authority. Tara has positional authority over the children, and we need to respect that authority and not work against her. Respect that. Now, the deacons are actually resource administrators. We have a certain number of resources that we own as a congregation, and it is up to that board to choose the most prudent, to exercise stewardship in their decisions over how we best appropriate those resources. They are administrators. You know, the root of administration is what? Minister. Administration is a valid ministry. So if a minister asks you not to make 6 trips to the bathroom in one service, unless you've eaten some green apples, don't do it. You know, respect their authority and their need to preserve some sort of order in what's going on in the congregation. If they ask you not to bring beverages into the sanctuary, then respect that. Don't bring the beverages into the sanctuary. They're doing a job that if you knew what it really was, you wouldn't be willing to do it, I guarantee you. I don't want to do it. They've got the harder job. Let's say that next year, Jan coordinates the food at Pesach. Should we all just bring what we want to bring, or should we submit to her positional authority and bring what she asks us to bring? And not try to fix it. Whatever she's planned, not, well, why don't you do it this way? Why don't you do this? Well, why don't you? Give her that authority. Give her that respect. It'll go much more smoothly. You know, if Kathy's doing Sukkot decorations, do what she asks you to do. Don't interfere with it. If Ella is master of ceremonies and she asks you to be here at a certain time and you hear that shofar blow, get here. Respect that positional authority that she has. It's just a matter of respecting positions that we each hold, because if we disrespect others, you will be disrespected. It's what you sow into the realm that you're going to reap. If you want respect, give it, even if you don't agree with what that person is doing. Haven't made you mad yet, have I? Okay. There's another type of leadership. Now, positional is something we really don't want to rely on in this congregation, because like I said, we are a nonprofit group, and if people don't like the leadership, they're free to leave. And sometimes we've encouraged them to, because there was a real problem there. Everybody couldn't do what was right in their own eyes. Our standards are not hard. You know, we're pretty open. We're pretty open to new ideas, but When something causes a major disruption to services, sometimes we have to say, no, this is the way that we're going to walk as a congregation. If you can't respect that, then at least respect the positional authority and make a choice. Is this where you want to call home or not? If it is, then just mutually submit to us. But we can't rely on that. What we really need to put our emphasis on is something called personal leadership. Personal leadership really comes from a true leader, not just a person that has the position. Because a true leader will cause you to follow them even without a title or an office. The most influential person in the congregation may not have a title, because that personal influential leader is the one who will cause you to follow them. They won't beat you up and make you do it, or say, because I'm the mommy, that's why. What they will do is, through their ability, through their skill, through their ethics, through their confidence, through their ability to communicate, others will naturally begin to gravitate to that person. They will tend to look to that person, and they will tend to do what that person asked them to do. That's a personal sort of leadership. And that person is, number one, an encourager. That person knows how to encourage others to take the small steps that are necessary for success. Some of you grew up in a family where you can, if the family were big enough, you can identify who the personal leader in the family was. If you had several brothers and sisters, there was usually one that was either responsible for everyone getting in trouble or getting everyone out of trouble. Right? I've known some siblings that maybe a younger brother or sister did actually break the lamp or tear up the neighbor's water pump, and that older brother took the whipping for the younger sibling. That was a leader. Took responsibility because that younger child was under his care at that time, and that child never felt the spank. It was the older brother that took it. That's personal leadership. That's saying, I will be responsible. Or there might have been one that was constantly getting everyone into trouble with them. Somehow they had the power to influence you to do things you knew better than to do. They had personal leadership. You can use it for good or bad, because the Psalms are full of people who also conspire to do bad, to do evil. And there's usually a leader in that group who is leading and guiding that conspiracy to do evil. But a leader is one who consistently looks beyond right now. The one that's always getting you into trouble is not the one that's worried about what we're doing right now. It's the one that's thinking about what we could be doing over here, right? Same thing. A personal leader will look ahead. They will look into the future. In Scripture, that you lift up your eyes and you look into the future and you see things as they could be. You see a promise ahead, and they inspire others to follow them toward that goal. A personal leader is usually a very consistent person. You know how they're going to act from day to day. They won't come in with surprises. They won't come in a really bad mood today and then come in, on springboards tomorrow. They're very consistent. They fly steady because people feel like they can trust them to be the same tomorrow and the next day. They don't feel like they're putting confidence in somebody that's going to shift with their moods. It's always a person that's going to say you can instead of you can't. Those people, if you'll listen to what they're saying, those are the leaders that you know in your life. You can identify those things in their lives. Now, some people just don't have that ability. They just don't have that personal leadership, the personal influence that causes others to follow them without them being forced. That does not mean that you are a deficient person if people don't follow you. Because the good news is leadership skills can be learned. It's not, I know you've always heard, well, he's a born leader. Well, he might have been born with some personality characteristics that make him an influential person, but everyone can learn leadership skills. With Moshe, we can see a prime example. He was not necessarily a born leader, because the first time he interferes on behalf of his brothers, they're not following him. They're saying, "Well, are you going to kill us too?" No respect at all for what he had just done by killing an Egyptian the day before. And you think, I'm sure he thought, well, they'll respect me now and see me as the leader. I'm the one that God's going to raise up to lead them out of here. And he got no respect. He had to learn leadership skills, and a lot of times you learn leadership leading sheep. So don't worry if you don't feel like you have inborn leadership ability. You can learn it. You can practice by working on those qualities that I'm talking about. A psychologist calls this learned optimism. You know, there's always somebody who says the glass is half empty. That is what? A pessimist. What if the person says the glass is always half full? The optimist. Psychologists say that you can learn. If you are a pessimist, we're all going to die. You can learn to be the optimist. You can learn to be the one that says it's half full. Even if you're a half empty personality, you can learn to be a half full personality. And guess who fills up the rest? You just have to see it as possible. Part of learning this optimism, which is the essential quality of a leader, is optimism. Is learning to live in the present and the future, not the past. That's critical. A leader must live in the right now and the future. A leader cannot live in the past. If you're still dredging up stuff that happened 5 years ago and you're not over it, you're not a leader yet. The glass is half full. You're going to have to forget those things unless they are learning experiences, and you can incorporate those things. But you can't keep digging up the bones, as they say, and pulling it out and looking at it. Leave it behind you. You're right here, right now, and you have a future. Learn to live in the now and to look toward the future. That's learned optimism. Don't dredge up the failures of the past. You can kind of tell a pessimist because they will use absolutes like, "You never do this. You're always doing that." Well, no one always or never does anything. But we tend to see the world that way. I'm afraid to try because I know I will fail. I always do. Something always happens. And we all have this logic in our minds. It's almost like a gambler's fallacy, where we think if we've rolled a 6 5 times, luck says I can't do it again. We all have a mentality like that. We're almost afraid of success. And we think, well, if I've had this much success, something's going to happen tomorrow and sabotage it. Have you ever felt that way? Things are going too good. Something's bound to happen. We kind of have that mentality. But a leader's not going to wake up saying, I've had 5 good days, we're bound to have a bad one within the next day or so. A leader wakes up and says, we've had 5 good days, let's build on that. And who cares what happens? This is belief, believing that the future will be better. That's faith. A pessimist is an unbeliever. A pessimist does not have faith that it will ever be any better. A leader says, wow, that was a mistake back there, but who says that all the time? There's a lesson in that. I think that's our theme song. There's a lesson in that. You know what? That's the language of an optimist. Yeah, we made a mistake back here, but there's a lesson in that. We can learn from it, move forward, and we don't have to make that same mistake again. That's the language of optimism, and that's the language of leaders. We can learn from that. Now we know how to handle it. No one will sneak up on me the same way twice, right? Who would you rather follow? The person that is drowning in failure or swimming for shore? Hey, I'm headed for shore. You can sit there and tread water all you want to, but I'm getting out of the water. I'm going to the beach. And that's the person that you want to follow. And if you want people to follow you, you have to swim for shore. You know, there's an old Russian proverb that says, pray to God, but row for shore. And we've all heard the helicopter joke. You know, God sends all this stuff. And why didn't you save me? Well, I sent you a helicopter, I sent you a boat, and you were sitting there waiting for me. The optimist says, I see help on the way, and I will use that help. It's important for us all to have personal leadership as a goal in our lives. That's one of the goals of my life, is to improve my leadership ability. Because if I'm walking down the wrong road and people are following me, that's not a good thing. Because we're all going to fall off in the ditch together, right? And then they're going to be really mad at me. We want to go down the right road, and the right road is one of optimism. It's one of faith, one of lifting up the eyes and seeing the future and seeing that Yeshua is there in everything that we do. Personal leadership is not contingent upon having a title. A personal leader in a group will rise up to the top very quickly. A great leader, like I say, may not have the title. It might be the person sitting next to you, and that's the person that everybody runs to when there's an issue. That's how you identify them. We want to use bell sheep. You know, as lay leaders, you can be a bell sheep. You can know where you're going. You can be steady. You can hear the voice of the Good Shepherd. And if you've got a bell around your neck, others will follow after you and follow you down the right path. But we must strive to be personal leaders as opposed to positional leaders. Why? Because, like I say, this is a nonprofit organization. Anybody can leave. They can walk away at any time. If we rely on positional leadership, we don't have a handle on anything. You know, if we just say it's because I'm the mommy, that's why, or because I'm the elder, that's why, or because I'm the deacon, that's why, that's not leadership in a nonprofit. We can't rely on the position, although there are times that you're going to get backed up in that corner, and that's all that you can do. But that shouldn't always be the answer. That should be an answer of last resort. Why is that sometimes an acceptable answer? Because there is not one person in this whole wide world who can please everybody at all times. And now I know, if you were honest, you could tell me the specific times that you have known me that I have let you down in some way, or I did not meet your expectations. You could say the same, and you could say the same of Jimmy. Some way we did not rise to your expectations at some time. And that's why I'm saying we can't always meet everybody's expectations every day. So there will come a time in your life where you say, I can't respect what that person just did. I cannot respect that decision. And at that time, realizing that nobody ever can, you have to defer to the positional authority. And we'll try another day to make you happy. We don't give anybody here a paycheck at the end of the week, so if we're mismanaging the trust of this flock, then they'll go away. We have to develop personal leadership. Sheep in this flock can take the front door or the gate out. We can't hold them here. We have no hold over them. They must want to be here, and they must want to submit to whatever leadership is in place. We can expect people to respect the positional authority or the offices that exist within this congregation, but if we abuse our position, if we use our position to our advantage and not as faithful shepherds over the flock, then we can't expect them to stay here. They're not bound to stay here. Now, we can't bear responsibility for people who walk away just because they didn't get their way over something. You know, there's certain things that we can't control. They're free to go. You know, maybe they just weren't committed. We've seen a lot of people, they're in, they're out, they're in, they're out. They're just not committed. They're not necessarily an olive brancher. Their goals and visions are different, and they were probably better served in another congregation. We can send them along with love, you know, and we wish them all the best and blessings. Go where you can bloom, right? But if you feel like you're supposed to bloom here, we want you to develop a personal leadership, because we can't control you. We can only depend upon the power of the Holy Spirit and your willingness to follow personal authority and personal leadership. You know, and if you walk behind some of these people who go from congregation to congregation, you might see that there's a problem. If you walk behind them in their footsteps, maybe they never have been able to submit to either positional or personal authority. There's just a problem there, most likely. So we can only bear responsibility for what we do as poor leaders and as poor judgments that we might make as leaders. And that includes the bell sheep. You know, if somebody leaves, you might say, well, it's the elder's fault they left. They didn't handle that situation right. But did you as a bell sheep handle it right? Did you as a bell sheep handle it with personal leadership? Did you influence them in a good way? Did you influence that unhappy person with the language of optimism, or did you get right down in the pit with them? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Nobody has to be here. Olive branch on Shabbat is one choice out of millions. People could be doing millions of other things other than coming to a Shabbat service. This isn't the military. It's not a cult. We don't make people be here. But it would be nice if they wanted to be here. I think the hold, if we have a hold on people, it has to be what I was teaching about on Shabbat. It has to be the power of a personal testimony. That is going to influence people more than a title, more than how good your Hebrew is, more than all of these other things. Because you have experience with the living Messiah. That is what will hold them. That is your personal influence. Because if you have experience, listen to me, if you have experience with the Messiah, then you have the advantage over the person who has only information. You have a great advantage. In every flock, and especially when we assimilate in new sheep, people kind of look for three important things when they first come into a congregation. They look to find out what are our objectives as a congregation. What are our goals? And what are our standards? They're looking to us for a plan to reach those objectives. If they agree with the objectives that they are good, and they agree with the goals that they are good, and they agree with the standards that they are good, and they can live within these limits and within these guidelines, then the next thing they're going to do is look for people who have a plan to reach those goals, objectives, and standards. We have to be those people. And who really put us on track with the congregational vision was Elder Robinson, when he suggested the community that we've been talking about. And I came along and I said, well, I really have a vision for education, you know, to have a place of learning. And I added that to it. And then when Elder Gibson came back on board, we sat down, we talked about it. How can we reach these goals? How can we reach this vision? How can we reach these objectives? Then we informed you. We let you know what we were thinking and what we had in mind. And we tried to involve you. And at each step along the way, we must continue to involve you and to discuss those goals with you. And even though we're doing daily things and weekly things, we still have to look toward that ultimate goal. You know, how are we going to reach the long-term goals? Because we have second and third generations now depending upon what we do as a congregation. You know, the easiest thing we'll ever do is acquire land to build our own place. That's absolutely the easiest goal we'll ever have. Because there's not much you can do to fail at it except not to do it. But once you acquire that land, that's when the trouble starts, right? And that's when we have to truly find another gear and start exercising personal leadership in order to reach the next goal and the next goal and the next. A day will come when we will look back and say, I wish the only problem we had right now was finding property to build on. So that's just something to look forward to. Planning is the most important thing that we will ever do together. And that's the point at which I anticipate the most conflict. If we think we've had conflict in the past, we ain't seen nothing yet. It's when we start trying to build a building How many churches have split over building a building? We're going to have to work out in advance how we plan to reach our goals and how we will deal with the problems that arise. Planning and implementing is a cycle, and that is the time in which a group is most likely to become either like the body of Messiah or to become like the body of Satan. We don't know yet what we will become. But if we are exercising personal leadership, then hopefully we will be like the body of Messiah, and we will agree that each of our views are limited. What we can see is limited. A kneecap doesn't have the same view as a rear end, right? Totally different view. But you know what? If I need advice on what kind of pews or chairs to buy, whose advice do I respect? The kneecaps or the rear ends? The rear end has positional authority. So I'm going to recognize that, and I'm going to choose chairs and pews based on what this rear end is telling me. And the kneecap just has to deal with something else, and the kneecap has to submit to the rear end. That's what it is like to be the body of Messiah. You're going to have to trust the judgment and the vision of other people in the congregation who have skills and abilities that you don't when these projects are done. Every person in here has a hidden agenda. I even have one. And if we were, mind readers, it would be nice as elders if we could, go through each person and say, okay, well, this person's hidden agenda is this, and this one's is this, and this one's is this. But we can't do that. We have to depend upon you to subject and to submit your personal agenda to the good of the congregation, to be able to cooperate with the congregation regardless of what your agenda is. You give us your best information and your best